We want to welcome you to our webinar this morning on mindfulness and self-care, building a resilient community and culture of caring, which certainly is what Safe Babies is about. As soon as we have everybody join, we're going to, yes, I see people are sharing with other people, which is a good thing. That's what we need to do. As soon as everybody joins, we're going to start with a little exercise, but I don't think everybody has joined yet. So we'll wait a few more minutes.
Dr. Osofsky, we can start.
We can start? Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So because we're going to be talking about topics and issues and really thinking about topics and issues that may be hard and bring up emotions and make us feel a little bit stressed, we're going to start with a self-care breathing exercise that many of us feel very helpful. And I think those of you who know it will find it very helpful and are already doing it. And our organizers here had shared it a little bit before. We thought that was a good way to start. So, you know that there are many sites where we can learn about mindfulness and self-care. There's Calm that a lot of people like. There's Headspace, but I really like this breathing exercise. So if you would join with me, please. It's called 478 breathing technique. And the first step, and we're going to go through it, and I'm going to go through it with you, is to breathe in through the nose for a count of 4, and then you hold your breath for a count of 7, and then part your lips and exhale loudly. You don't have to do it loudly today, but in general, for a count of 8. So let's start. I'm going to breathe in through the nose for a count of 4, and please join me. Hold breath for a count of 7. I'm holding, even though I'm talking. And then part your lips and exhale loudly for a count of 8. And we'll do that one more time where I will not talk. I will just say 4, 7, 8. So please breathe in your nose for the count of 4. And then hold the breath for a count of 7. And part your lips and exhale loudly for a count of 8. And if anybody has any comments about this, finds it helpful, we're going to go back to this. And remember it, because it's an easy exercise and really helpful with self-care. So could we go on to our next slide? Okay, so we're presenting this slide to you now. I want you to think about what's going on with you, how you feel when you're helping families, how you feel when you're experiencing trauma. I will share with you a situation that was very, very stressful for me. I was many years ago was referred to little boys, 2-year-old little boys who had witnessed the shooting death of their mother by their father. And they were there when it happened. They were there when the police came out. There was blood on them at the time. And it happened in another state, and they came to us for support because their grandparents were there. And every time I thought of the incident and what these little boys went through, cute little boys we were trying to help, I just felt so stressed and so overwhelmed. And what we would like you to do is think now and share with us how you feel when you're helping families experiencing trauma and the trauma triggers that you may feel as well. When you think about it again, I feel it right now in myself. And I'm going to turn it over to my close colleague and friend, Bernicia Allen. What word comes up for you as you describe how you're feeling when helping families experiencing trauma? And please, everybody feel free. I see stressed, overwhelmed, anxious. Sad, helpless, helplessness. Tired. And also love, afraid, exhausted, hopeful, heartbroken. You can see them all. Empathy. Empathy is a big one. And empathy is something that leads to issues related to the need for self-care, stress. Frustrated. Sad seems to come up a lot. Worried, confused, jittery, supportive for others, hopeless, confused. I hope that you're feeling what I'm feeling reading these words, because it's a bit overwhelming. Sorrow, frustration, supportive for others, angry, pain. This is why we're talking today about mindfulness and self-care for the work that we do and that all of you are doing. Supportive for others, and that's what our session is about today, and empathy, growth, compassion. Helplessness. I sometimes feel helpless in these situations and not really knowing how to make a difference when I'm with someone also where there are these trauma triggers that occur, how you can help support people under these circumstances. So let's go on. Thank you very much. That was very helpful for all of us. So we've already done this, so I don't have to describe this to you, that we are slowing down today and noticing our feelings. And you may feel a brief increase in heart rate, elevations in stress, serious temporary stress responses buffered by supportive relationships make it tolerable. So dealing with stress positively, we have to be aware of it, and then making it tolerable. You see that buffered by supportive relationships. As you know, I've been working with Safe Babies since the very beginning, and those supportive relationships make a huge difference. And we need some supportive relationships in our lives too. And then when it gets toxic, and you've seen this in the charts from Center for the Developing Child at Harvard, that prolonged activation of stress in the absence of protective relationships. So stress can also help us grow. On the positive side, we need it. And one of the examples they give is when a child goes off to school, little child goes off to school for the first time, it's stress. But then with supportive relationships, they learn to handle it as they learn to handle other things. And with those supportive relationships, it's tolerable, but it does get toxic. And I'm sure for all of us with the work that we do at times, there's this prolonged activation of stress, and we really need protective relationships. And that's one of the most important things that I can emphasize today. Next slide, please. So the team is sharing with you, we're sharing with you examples of compassion fatigue as well as compassion satisfaction. So we will have the handouts about that. I think some of you have already familiar with all of those, but essentially refers the definition, the standard definition, refers to the cumulative effect of working with survivors of traumatic life events. Anyone who engages empathically with victims or survivors is vulnerable. And traumatic life events are things that working with child welfare, what happens in child welfare every day. I remember actually being at a pre-removal conference, which is supposed to be a time that's more supportive than just walking in. I remember, as Judge Cohen used to say, walking in and taking your child. And I felt so much compassion fatigue. I felt so much sorrow for that family when that child was being taken away. So even doing it in the most empathic way brings up other things. So let's go on to the next slide. Secondary traumatic stress, just so we understand it a little better. And I thank my team for some of the visual imagery too. Wanting to help a traumatized or suffering person. I got a call over the weekend, late in the evening, from somebody who I knew well, who had something very traumatic happen to them. And they apologized 4 times for calling, told me their story, and I listened and I said, it's fine. And we talked it through. So it was trauma that they were experiencing. What happens with secondary traumatic stress, repeatedly hearing stories, repeatedly worrying about the stressful event or trauma. And this last bullet there is so important. Helping professionals are at high risk and be highly impacted. And I remember another experience from many, many years ago. I was doing training. I was training clinicians to work with children who'd been exposed to trauma, many in the child welfare system, and families that had been exposed to trauma. And part of our training is that the clinician gets up in front of the group, presents the case, and talks about it, and then we provide feedback and support. She was a very experienced clinician, very, very good, got up in front of the room, started to talk about the case, and within 5 minutes, she could barely talk anymore, and I saw tears in her eyes. And I stopped the presentation. I said, let's take a 5 or 10 minute break. And I went up to her and talked to her, and it turned out she was going through an experience of vicarious traumatization and compassion fatigue. She felt so sorry for this family that she was trying to help, that it was just all coming up with her as she was presenting the case. And so we talked, and I supported her for a while, and then I asked, did she really want to go on? And she did, and was able to do that. But helping professionals are at very high risk. Let's go on to the next slide, please. So what are the costs of caring? The same attribute that makes us good at our work. It has a cost. So we can't do this work without having powerful feelings aroused in ourselves. Jeree Paul, one of the founders of our infant mental health field, always had wonderful statements that were very helpful. This is one of them. You can't work on behalf of human beings and try to help them without having powerful feelings aroused. And we have to be able to experience and tolerate them, but we also have to recognize them and have to be able to talk with others about them so we can hold that trauma. When I got this call the other night, I knew that I had to hold that trauma, and I listened, and I was reassuring. This is somebody I knew well and held that trauma. But afterwards, you feel it within yourself. That's another reason that the breathing exercise is so helpful. And I have this slide on here just because I think it's really important. We all are still being affected by COVID-19 pandemic in our work, and it contributed to difficulties. And I'm sure many of you had losses, illness. We just want it to go away. But I think that the main point here that's important for us to recognize is being able to be empathic and caring and listen to somebody else's trauma and recognize it as their trauma triggers and help them with them. These attributes make us good at our work, but they also have a cost, and that's why we're talking like we are today. Next slide, please. So, what puts at risk for vicarious traumatization or compassion fatigue, or a simple way to describe it, dysregulation? And one of the reasons that there is supervision, reflective practice, other types of things built into the work of Safe Babies and the work that all of us do and everything that we need is having these experiences of repeated exposure of stories of stress and trauma. It's really hard to continually hear about stress and trauma and hold it for other people. Working in an overwhelmed system, I think my understanding of Safe Babies is, yes, we're working in an overwhelmed system. We know child welfare is an overwhelmed system and families are overwhelmed and young children are overwhelmed. But by having supportive relationships, that helps in terms of being able to get support, even though one's working in an overwhelmed system. And then the other thing that's very, very frustrating and can lead to vicarious traumatization or compassion fatigue is lack of quick fixes. You know, I must say, probably every few months I get a call from someone I've worked with, or I might make a call where we're trying to make a decision of what would be our best recommendation as clinicians in terms of placement of a child. I know we have judges on the call and lawyers on the call, and you're having to deal this all the time, as well as people who are in child welfare teams, community teams that have to make these decisions. So there aren't any quick fixes. And we know that whatever decision we make may come back, and we'll have to think about it again. Also, and I find this very difficult, and I'm sure you do, is increased awareness of the frequency and profound harm of trauma, abuse, and neglect. You know, I must say during COVID, and, you know, I hope we're beyond it. I keep hearing about it, and you keep hearing about different variations on it, but I think we're pretty much beyond it. But the profound harm of trauma, abuse, and neglect. Well, one of the things that helps is being with other people in supportive relationships. Having to deal with that and not being able to talk about it and share is really challenging. Not being able to go out with your friends or colleagues for a cup of coffee and sitting down and talking things through and getting that support. The other thing that can lead to vicarious traumatization are also dysregulations, being exposed to intense anger, displaced onto us, that they're angry at the system, what happened to them, and get very angry at us. And how can you be empathically available under those circumstances? So I think that's another issue we need to think about. Next slide, please. So what are the risk factors that impact on our work with traumatized children and families? And if anybody would like to bring up anything in the chat, I know my close friend and colleague, Darnisha Allen, is on, and stop if you pick up something in the chat that we ought to be thinking about. I'm wondering how many of you measure your own self-worth by how much you help others. And my guess is many of us, we feel like if we can't help it, if we can't make it better, then, you know, what are we doing? And the next box there, unrealistic expectation, is related to that. We really can't measure our self-worth by how much we help others. We'll try to help others, but sometimes you can't always do that. I certainly know in my field, I feel that way, that we have unrealistic expectations of what we can do, and we're self-critical. You know, we have to do everything well and everything right. So that's another risk factor. I wonder how many of you sometimes fear others will judge you if you show weakness. If you say, I can't do this, I need a break, I need a day off, and others will say, oh, you know, that's why we're talking about this also, is we all need self-care. The breathing is one thing, that's a quick thing, but we need to take a walk, we need to get away, we need a break, or we need to talk to somebody else about how we feel. And I know very clearly that often talking to somebody else about how you feel and letting it out can certainly be helpful, but makes you sometimes feel like you're weak. So you don't want to show your feelings and you want to avoid them. And what about that next box, being unable to give or receive emotional support? I can do it myself. I don't need any help. I don't need you. I have to do it myself. I have to take all this on myself. Very important to be able to receive emotional support, to be able to call up or talk to one of your colleagues or say, I need a break. Do you have 10 minutes? I need to tell you about something. It's really important to be able to do that. And then lack of work-life balance. None of us had a work-life balance during COVID because the kinds of things that balanced us, we couldn't do. You've probably heard me say this before, but I wish during COVID, instead of talking about social distancing, they talked about physical distancing to be safe and emphasized the importance of relating to others, whether it was on the telephone or via Zoom or some other platform where we could do that. So that lack of work-life balance, I think, affected people very much at that time and led to more vicarious traumatization. So Laura Grant is sharing it's important to check in with the person you're talking to about your feelings and share with them. And thank you for sharing that with us. For me, it's the hardest challenge is seeing kids going back into homes that continue to be unsafe. Yeah, and what about, I know that, and I know I've sat in courtrooms and been in courtrooms where judges have to make decisions, and they may not be, excuse me, if there are judges on, and please correct me, they may not be that comfortable about the decisions they have to make, but they have to be made. And the issue of going back in a home where you're concerned a child may not be safe, whether it's a judge or attorney or clinician, decisions are made, and we have to try to support the child and the family as well as we can, but that's very hard. Let's go on to our next slide, please. So, additional risk factors that are important for us to think about. Stressful life situations that haven't been worked out. I am not going to get into personal things, but for those of us who've had losses at various times in our lives, those of us who've experienced difficult situation, they come back to us. You think that you've worked it through. I can say for a clinician, where we're supposed to have worked things through, these things come back. And what I talked before about trauma triggers, it's very, very important for us to be aware of trauma triggers, things that may come up and a stressful life event that we think has been worked through, but we haven't, and it comes back, and that can interfere with our work. And then additional risk factors, we've talked about this. It came up so clearly in the word cloud, repeated exposure to the cruelty of other people. And you can become hardened by that, emotionally hardened, cynicism. How can people treat other people this way? And that can lead certainly to vicarious traumatization and compassion fatigue. And we have to be able to talk to the people to talk to them about it. And then, this is a problem that comes up for all of us. And I would start to not being able to discuss painful and troubling aspects of work with a spouse, a partner, a family, or friends. So the way I wrote that the first time was not being able to. What about not being willing to also? It's interesting. Things come back to you when you talk about vicarious traumatization or compassion fatigue, and I'm going to share one of these with you. We see a lot of parents who are emotionally hardened due to their lives that influences how they will react. Many years ago, I was working with trying to do some support for during disasters for police officers or firefighters with what they were seeing and what they were having to deal with after disasters. And was meeting actually with a group of firefighters. And there was one man who said, Oh, thank you, Darnisha. Would you like to bring that up? Sharing the experience, Eileen, speaks to the feeling. Would either of you like to share that? I'll stop for a minute if you would like to.
I don't want to interrupt. Joy, I was just responding in the chat to something that um, when you look at the word cloud where we started and people shared their emotions, really echoed that message that we could feel really helpless when we're trying to support and help others, and just holding the fact that you are still human in this process and you're doing your best even on the worst days. But those moments when you can pause and breathe, like where you started in the webinar, even if it doesn't fix what's happening in the situation, it certainly helps everyone who's involved in the process to take that moment and not feel as if they're sitting alone, but actually having someone who will pause with them in that space is beneficial for all. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you very much, Darnisha. I appreciate that. What I was going to share, and it's interesting in terms of giving presenting a talk of this type, something came back to me that I want to share with you. This firefighter looked over at me. He didn't know me that well, but he said, Dr. Osofsky, do you have a minute? And we were doing training, and I said, yeah. And I had my office there, and I said, come in, and I closed the door. And he said, something came back to me that I really wanted to share with you. And I hope that's okay. And I said, I'm listening. He was going to respond to a fire in a trailer, and it was a very intense fire. And there were 2 adults and 3 children. And he went in and he was trying to save them. And then the fire got too intense that he had to back out and leave. And it occurred to him about 15 years before he told me this story. And he said he went back after they finally got the fire under control, and he saw that there had been 2 children 2 feet from where he was, and he had to leave. And he said it's been haunting him ever since that happened. And we talked about it, and he shared it. And that just came to mind when I brought about this idea of discussing painful and troubling aspects and not being able to talk about that. And he didn't know me that well, but he trusted me and was able to talk about it, and we talked it through. So I think these things are really very important for us to realize that something may occur. And I know in the comments, some of this may have come up, and we don't talk about it, or we can't talk about it. And then it's very important to trust someone to be able to do that, to be able to move on and be empathic as we need to do in our work. Next slide, please. So how do we recognize signs of stress in ourselves? And I think this is really important for us to be aware of. Difficulty managing emotions, being irritable. I wonder how many of you just, feel like I can't do this anymore. Or we see an angry outburst that shouldn't be occurring, or we get mad at the system or something like that. Problems in relationships, isolating ourselves. That's why I made the comment before that being able to relate to others in relationships is crucial for this work. Difficulty managing boundaries, taking on too much. Boundaries I find to be a really big issue that we talk about a lot and have to think about. Being irritable, emotional outbursts. I've seen this occur across all of our professions, and certainly sometimes feel it myself, try to keep it internal. And then loss of meaning and hope. Why am I doing this work if I can't make a difference? And why are people treating children this way? And then, all of those are issues that can come up for us, that can get in the way of the work that we do. And that's an important time that we need to be able to talk to others and share. So problems making decisions, lack of understanding, lack of interest, just feeling burned out. I'm wondering what some of you do when you feel burned out. We always talk about, the breathing exercise is a quick one, but taking a walk or going to a movie, all kinds of things. But we have to recognize the signs of stress. Even lack of interest in doing this work. I can't do it anymore. And so these are all issues we should think about. And if anybody would like to add something, recognizing signs of stress, we appreciate that too, because we are always learning and doing this work. Next slide, please. I sit outside after dark once my son goes to sleep and just breathe in the night air. That's nice. Yeah, that, those deep breaths and being by yourself, and it's really helpful. Become distant from my loved ones and not as comical. So what we're hearing is people have different ways of recognizing, and everybody on this call, and I appreciate it. Taking a walk in the woods, that's one of my favorites. Taking a walk in the woods or park, and do some breathing along the way and look at the trees. Yeah, it can be very relaxing. I know I had a colleague who used to say, live by a woods, and every evening tried to take a walk. So difficulties of working with traumatized children and families, balancing the demands of work with children and families impacted by trauma, and balancing your own family, other responsibilities and pressures, limited support, difficulty leaving work at work. And that example I gave you before, balancing demands of work with children and families impacted by trauma is one that's really, really important. My children are older now, you all know that. And I also have fortunate enough to have grandchildren, but I remember it very clearly. I was working out in the community and trying to help families, and met with a number of mothers whose children were in the child welfare system. There were another group of mothers who lost some children to violence, and we had a group, and we spent 2 hours talking and sharing and trying to provide support. There were some others with me who were doing this also, and I had 3 young children at the time. And I went home that evening, and I fortunately have a husband who was at home, and I said, I really appreciate your taking care of the children tonight. I just have to go up and go to bed or lie down or something. It takes a lot out of you, and recognizing it and being able to get support from somebody else is really important, but it really does take a lot out of us. And I see comments that other people very much agree with this. Let's take a look at our next slide. So, compassion, satisfaction. My one and only child at almost 2. This work hits different now after having my own children. Absolutely. I gave that example I haven't thought of for a while. I hadn't planned all these examples. It came up to me when I was presenting. So, compassion, satisfaction, that's the other side of it, and really important for us. Susan, I'm right. Reflective supervision is very important for the work that we do. Absolutely. So, compassion, satisfaction, where does that come from? Okay. John Hennon, I'm pretty new to the idea of self-care, usually helping others. So, working together with colleagues and having shared goals. That's what one thing I really love about Safe Babies. I love a lot of things about Safe Babies, but working together with colleagues, having shared goals. It feels like sometimes when you see someone who you haven't seen for a month or something like that, you're continuing in the footsteps you had before. The shared goals that we all share, that's so important in helping others. Contributing to a positive work setting, doing something. I know one of my colleagues is continually bringing in cookies or cupcakes or something when we meet, because we know that the discussions that we have are going to be difficult, and she feels like feeding people will help. Getting pleasure from helping others through your own efforts. That's why we're all doing this work. We do get pleasure from helping others. That's why we would choose to work with a program, excellent program like Safe Babies, and helping children and helping families who've had a lot of difficulties themselves. Trusting relationship, support from others, and obviously self-care is in the middle of that. But the trusting relationships are so important. It's sometimes hard to develop trusting relationships, and those among people when we work with trauma is even harder. But it's also, we sort of seem to know where we come from and what we need to talk about. try to help the others who join us to learn how important it is for compassion satisfaction. Safely sharing concerns and problem-solve issues with colleagues. That's something that's just so important. I remember I was once referred a young woman to see who had recently been in a car where there had been a random shooting that occurred, and her boyfriend was killed, and was referred to me for support. And one of my colleagues said to me when I started to work with her, said, this is sort of safely sharing, share your concerns and problem solve issues with colleagues, and I'm here to talk to you if you need it. Darnisha, would you please bring that up, what you just put in the chat?
Joy, I was just sharing something based on something that John Hannon shared in the chat that you commented on, being new to the idea of self-care. All too often, I think when we're sitting in this work, we're helpers or seen as the helpers, and often when you're the helper, you don't naturally make a lot of room to help others. I think you and I have actually had this discussion too about even the permission to talk and share. And so even when you are sitting with others in conversations and you're being that trusted ear for them, you tend over time to carry parts of that. And so when we think about sitting in a place where you're balancing compassion for others and recognizing the need for compassion for self, is important to like expand our self-care routines to include an ear of our own so that you have somewhere to unpack those things. The energy that you take in from other people, you carry that energy. And so having an outlet for that allows it to flow through you rather than you being the holder of that in that space.
Thank you so much. And that idea of mindfulness, being fully present and aware of your feelings, working with young children and families and child welfare. And I thank you, both of you, for the comments, because it's really helpful. Let's go on to our next slide. So sometimes we're so eager to help others, we forget to help ourselves. Thank you, Josie, and for that comment, which is so important. So we're sharing with you both the compassion fatigue and compassion satisfaction scales at a time that you might want to look at those. We're talking about the issues here, but if things get hard, important to take a look at these, particularly the compassion satisfaction. We all know a lot about compassion fatigue and burnout and secondary traumatic stress, but we don't always think about compassion satisfaction, which is really important. And a lot of that has to come from working in a program like this one, and working with families and working in teams the way we do. Next slide, please. So, ways to provide support for all working with the traumas of child welfare. Finding a way to talk safely with others about your concerns. And that's why I gave that example of that firefighter. He felt safe. I didn't know him. I hadn't met him before, but somehow, I guess with something that I said, he felt safe talking to me. Yes, being the helper tends to leave the helper feeling isolated and withdrawn from others. Thank you for sharing that too. And being able to talk to someone. And as I say, when my colleague came up to me and said, this is a tough case, I'm here if you want to talk about it. And I think we all need that, to have someone, even if we don't decide to do it, to know that there's someone there if we would want to. Discussions facilitated by professionals who understand trauma and secondary traumatic stress. I can tell you one of the things that when I started to work with Safe Babies with the program, we used to have lunch and learn meetings, but a lot of the meetings were just sharing what was going on and getting support and talking about it. And that's so important for the work, particularly understanding secondary traumatic stress. It takes something out of us. I mentioned the call we got the other night. After I got the call, I sat down for half an hour by myself and integrated it so that I would, because I was very emotionally available, but it takes something out of you too, and you have to recognize that. time to provide support and problem solve is very important. And share, learn, demonstrate empathy for others in the same situation. That's something that I've learned through Safe Babies from the very beginning. Sharing and being able to trust to share. We always have an opportunity to learn. And that empathy for others in the same situation is really important. And supporting and problem solving together is also very important. So these are some ideas I had. Let's go to the next slide. So what are the biggest challenges and concerns for you in your position right now? Kylene, is that our last slide? No, we have some more. Okay. Talking safely. Okay, shall we talk a little bit about the biggest challenges and concerns for you in your position right now? Would anybody like to bring that up in the chat? Okay, let's go on to the next slide as you think about that. One of my colleagues, close colleague Ann Mausden from Minnesota, who's done a lot of work on resilience, talks about surge capacity. Our surge capacity may be depleted by the work we have to do and the attention we have to give. And she talks about surge capacity. It sounds a little bit intellectual, but I want to define it for you: a capacity of adaptive systems, mental and physical, that we call upon to keep doing the work that we do. We draw upon them for short-term situations and long-term stressful situations. And if we have difficult situations at work and don't have support at home, and especially in the child welfare system, we can deplete our surge capacity and we have to renew it. And so I think sometimes we ought to think about the surge capacity and how to renew it, which is really important. Next slide, please. So these are obvious things about self-care. That's something that we need to think about: getting enough sleep. I know for some of you who have young children, particularly, it may be difficult to get adequate sleep. Christine shared trying to help people who want a black and white answer and more complicated than that. Absolutely. Adequate sleep, healthy nutrition. You know, sometimes we feel like we don't have time for a healthy meal and grab a candy bar or something else, but nutrition is really important. A time for relaxation. We reviewed some of that before. Someone told us some of the different things they did. I particularly like a walk in the woods, walking and breathing. Physical activity. I don't know about the rest of you, and you know, a lot of you may want to do physical activity to keep healthy or whatever else. My physical activity often, which I do often, is mental support for me. I relax when I exercise. It's just the kind of exercise I do, whether it's taking a walk or riding a bike or something like that, but it can be very relaxing and important. And then socializing, we've been talking about that. And that was something that was interfered with a great deal by COVID and got in the way of self-care, and we all know that. So next slide, please. Helping someone to break down the walls to let you in so you can help. Yeah, that's really important. Prevention. Adequate self-care, we keep talking about that. Knowing and honoring your personal limitations. We can only do so much. That little flower in the ground there is having a hard time and needs a little more water and a little more sun, and then it'll get healthy. Being able to be compassionate for yourself. That's what we talked about, compassion fatigue, but compassion satisfaction. Being able to be compassionate for yourself and learning how to say no when it just feels like too much. That's very hard for all of us. All of us who do this work, it's very hard to say no. But sometimes we just have to and find someone else or something like that. Very important for prevention. Next slide, please. Maintain appropriate boundaries. Whose needs am I meeting? Am I meeting your needs or my needs? So that's very important. 0 to 3, shared a file in the meeting, Eileen said. Stay emotionally connected without being over-involved. Whose needs am I meeting? Is very important. Am I meeting my needs or am I meeting somebody else's needs? Very important. Biggest challenge, Minette shares, exhaustion, transforming the culture, mindset, and child welfare. This one came up with a while ago, and I think it's really important. How can we unwind at home if we're also working at home and can't share our concerns? A lot of us have been working a lot at home lately, can't share our concerns. We don't want to complain all the time. How to unwind? That's why we talked about what we can do for relaxation, what we can do for self-care. Go in the other room and do some of the number breathing if we need to, or something like that. We really do need to be able to figure that out. Next, please. How can we unwind without having flexibility and needing to stay safe? And that's something that we have to be thoughtful about and think about. A lot of us don't have flexibility and obviously need to stay safe. And how can you unwind? How can you really trust someone? And someone else brought up earlier the reflective process, which is so important. But if you think about that, that's pretty complex, unwinding without having flexibility and needing to stay safe. So all of these are personal prevention. Let's go on to the next slide. Prevention at work, and I bring this up because I think we need to always think about potential prevention at work. Recognize that these stresses and responses that we're feeling are normal under the circumstances. Try to problem solve to reduce anxiety. We've talked about eating and exercise habits, taking breaks if that's possible, even if it's 5 minutes. We've talked about seeking support from others, and it's built into the Safe Babies program. We just have to always recognize to take advantage of, and relaxation to incorporate in your routine. That's why we started with the breathing, because you can do that and nobody knows you're doing that if you're really feeling stressed. That's one of the things I like about it. Next slide, please. So in order to help other people, we need to take care of ourselves and consider ways to manage stress, because in order to remain objective and to see all the different sides of that and help others, we need to take care of ourselves. And so I know that some of you may have seen this circle where you write down how you spend your time. And then you're very surprised when you put in the circle that you don't spend very much time to manage your stress and take care of yourself. Next slide, please. So ways to practice self-care: slow down and focus inwardly to determine how you're feeling. Seek balance in your life, personal, work, leisure, and building connections and supportive relationships. Obviously family, but coworkers and friends and others you can trust. Social connection is definitely a stress reducer. I think we're almost at the end. We want to take a little time for questions. Can I see the next slide? Okay. I may share this with you and then just go to a breathing at the end. If you'll excuse me for sharing Winnie the Pooh, and I'll just quickly read through it because I think it's a wonderful thing to think about as we end our presentation. Pooh says today was a difficult day, and Piglet says, do you want to talk about it? And Pooh said, no, I don't think I do. And Piglet said, that's okay, and just sat there. And Pooh said, what are you doing? And Piglet said, nothing really, only I know what difficult days are like, and I quite often don't feel like talking about it on my own, on my difficult days. But goodness, continued Piglet, difficult days are so much easier when you know you have someone there for you, and I'll always be here for you, Pooh. And as Pooh and Piglet sat there walking through his difficult day, the solid, reliable Piglet sat next to him, quietly swinging his little legs, and he thought his best friend had never been more right. So We want to take some time for questions, and it seems to me that's a good place to end. So I appreciate your attention to this difficult topic. And I do want you to remember the breathing. We did it at the beginning, so you can do it for yourself at the end. So we'd like to know if there are some questions that people would like to share that they haven't already, or comments or additional thoughts in the chat. Good reminder for me to take care of myself. Thank you, Melissa. We appreciate that. Any other comments? Anything we've law of the 457? Yeah, 478. Sorry, 478. And I think we're going to do that once more, Daniel. Thank you. I really like the term compassion satisfaction. I am so glad you brought that up. I had always known about compassion fatigue, or had always learned about compassion fatigue and what we needed to do. And I was very excited also, and really relieved to know that there's a way to look at compassion satisfaction as well. We need to look at both sides of it. That's why also when we talk about trauma, and we talk about stressful situations, we grow with it too, by learning that we need other people and how to deal with that. And and we have the scale to share with you. It's hard to take care of ourselves when we're busy helping others. Katie says I like to use peppermint or eucalyptus oil to sniff. Mike, I missed your comment. If you wanted to bring it up again. Breathing is so helpful. Last week I was carrying my screaming child in the toy section. And the breathing helps. I think I thought about that too. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah, with the screaming child. The idea of breathing, keeping yourself calm to deal with the child, or the child in the supermarket who wants to grab everything off the racks. I wish I had mindful sessions at my job. When I did my internship, they had a weekly guided mindful session. That's such a great comment, Monica. Totally agree with that. I wish they did too. Making time for yourself is not selfish. And that's something that we need to remember, to redirect your thoughts and feelings. Thank you for sharing that as well. Others want to share ideas? I must say, I feel so really good and very grateful when I receive the comments. One of the things that I like is we need to be mindful, not having our mind full. Absolutely. I wish it was easier to come up with different ways to fill your cup, hobbies, activities, and things. Highlighting the importance of self-care. In addition, we need to challenge us and our organizations. Oh, I'm glad you like the Winnie the Pooh. That's one of my favorites. And I had it in there earlier, and I actually asked when we were preparing last night, should I leave it in there? I asked my colleagues, and definitely. I think sometimes just the basic kinds of things are so important for us to be able to think about as well. And I'm really glad to hear the comments about hearing about compassion satisfaction. I felt that when I heard it the first time. One of my favorite quotes about self-care is from Emily and Amelia Nagoski, The Cure for, we couldn't see the whole thing if you wanted to put it. I'm glad it was helpful. And I think we have a few more minutes before we close. We're going to breathe one more time because we've been talking about a lot of difficult things, and we want to conclude with people being able to feel somewhat relaxed. So please breathe with me. Breathe through the nose for a count of 4. And hold that breath for a count of 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then part the lips and exhale loudly for a count of 8. So I hope that everybody did that with me. And when I'm finished talking, I'm going to do it for myself, but it's very easy and it works. And I feel very good about the fact that some of these ideas were new for you, or you expanded on them. And we really need to incorporate this in our way of thinking for the work that we do. I have to tell you, after talking about this and also doing the breathing myself, I feel a little bit more relaxed, and hearing your comments too, and that this was really helpful information for all the work that we do. So I thank you, and I thank Bernicia Allen and Kylene Parker for your support, and Robert Clark in preparing the presentation. And I also want to say how much I enjoy and admire the Safe Baby Sport Team and the way it's grown and what it does and how it helps so many young children and families. It's an honor to be part of Safe Baby Sport Team and the work that we do. That is now Safe Babies. I've always liked the term Safe Babies.